Doctors said she was broken beyond repair. But from a lonely hospital bed, using only a mirror and her pain, she became an immortal icon. How did Frida Kahlo turn her tragedy into a masterpiece? To join us for more powerful stories that improve your English, please subscribe and turn on notifications now. Welcome to our channel, my friends. I am John, and I am so happy to have you here with me today. Today, we are not just going to listen to a story about art. We are not just going to listen to a story about pain. We are going to listen to the story of a woman who had every possible reason to give up. But she didn't. She chose to rise, again and again. She did not ask the world for permission to be herself. She did not wait for love, or for health, or for good luck to arrive. Instead, she took her broken body and turned it into strength. She took her deep sadness and turned it into bright, burning color. She was betrayed by people she loved. She was forgotten by the world for a time. She was destroyed physically, but the world could never, ever ignore her soul. Today, we will walk into the fire she lived in. We will feel every tear she cried, every scream she held inside, and every heartbeat that kept her going. And together, we will learn English through the language of courage. This is the incredible, true story of Frida Kahlo, the woman who painted her pain and became immortal. This story is perfect for your English practice because it is told in simple, emotional language. You will learn how to understand real human feelings. You will improve your vocabulary, and you will connect deeply with every word while enjoying a powerful life story. It is not just English practice. It is English with emotion, with meaning, and with memory. Are you ready? Let's begin Part 1. The Girl Who Was Born Twice. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in Coyoacán. This was a beautiful, small town near Mexico City. But interestingly, Frida always told people, "I was born in 1910. Why did she lie about her age? It wasn't because of vanity. 1910 was the year the Mexican Revolution began. She didn't want to be just a simple girl from a small town. She wanted to be part of a revolution. She wanted her life to begin when the world was changing. Her full name was Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón. Her father, Guillermo, was a German photographer, a quiet man with an artistic eye. Her mother, Mathilde, was Mexican. She was a strong woman, very religious, and very strict with her children. Frida was the third of 4 daughters in the family, but she felt different from the very beginning. She was not like her sisters. She was wild. She was curious. She played with the boys in the street. She climbed trees. She fought like a warrior. However, when Frida was just 6 years old, her life changed forever. It was a change that would mark her for the rest of her days. She got a terrible disease called polio. This is a virus that attacks the body's muscles. Because of this illness, one of her legs became very thin and very weak. The other children were cruel. They laughed at her. They called her names like Frida the Peg Leg. Can you imagine how that felt for a 6-year-old girl? It must have been heartbreaking. But Frida didn't cry. She refused to let them see her pain. Instead, she ran. She boxed. She swam like a shark in the water, faster than the boys who teased her. She decided that if she was going to be different, she would be strong. Her father, who also suffered from health problems, became her best friend during this time. He understood her pain. He taught her photography. He taught her how to use a camera and how to paint. He taught her how to read difficult philosophy books. And when the world felt unfair to her, he told her something very important. He said, "You are stronger than life itself." At the age of 15, Frida entered the National Preparatory School. This was one of the very best schools in all of Mexico. It was a prestigious place. Out of 2,000 students at the school, only 35 were girls. Frida was one of those few girls. She was smart. She was loud. She was funny. And she was full of big dreams. At this time, she didn't want to be an artist. She wanted to become a doctor. She wanted to heal people. But fate, destiny, had other plans for her. Frida joined a group of rebellious students. They called themselves Los Cachuchas. They were a wild group. They made fun of their teachers. They acted in plays. They read poetry late into the night, and they debated politics with passion. Frida fell in love with books. She fell in love with ideas. And for the first time, she saw a man she would never forget. His name was Diego Rivera. He was a famous mural painter, and he was 20 years older than her. He was painting a mural at her school's auditorium. Frida stood there and watched him work. He was a giant man. He was large, he was wild, he was loud, and he was full of passion. Frida whispered to a friend standing next to her, "I'm going to marry him someday." She laughed when she said it. It was just a joke to her then. She had no idea how true those words would become. Then came the day that broke her life in two. On September 17th, 1925, everything changed. Frida and her boyfriend Alejandro were taking a bus home from school. The bus was packed with people. Frida sat beside a window, looking out at the street. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a heavy streetcar smashed into the side of the wooden bus. The sound was terrible. Metal twisted. People screamed. Glass shattered everywhere. It was chaos. In the crash, a metal handrail from the bus broke off. It pierced through Frida's body. It went through her pelvis. Her spine was broken in 3 different places. Her leg was shattered into pieces. Her shoulder was dislocated. She was just 18 years old. The doctors thought she would die. They looked at her broken body and shook their heads. But she didn't die. She opened her eyes. She said nothing, because the pain was too great for speaking. The pain was louder than any words she could say. Frida was taken to the hospital. The doctors performed surgery after surgery. They tried to put her bones back together. She couldn't walk. She couldn't sit. She couldn't even move her head. She was trapped in a body that had betrayed her. She was a prisoner in her own bed. But she had something that the accident couldn't break. She had her fire. While she was lying flat in bed, unable to move, her father gave her a special gift. He gave her a mirror and some paints. He built a special easel that allowed her to paint while lying down. He hung a mirror on the ceiling above her bed. Frida looked up. She saw herself in the mirror. She saw a girl who was broken, scarred, and in pain. But she also saw a girl who was alive. So she began to paint herself. She did not do this because she was vain or obsessed with her looks. She did it because she was lonely. She had no one else to paint. She once said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." In that hospital bed, with her body screaming in pain and a brush in her hand, Frida Kahlo was born again. Her dreams of becoming a doctor were gone forever. But she found a new medicine. That medicine was art. She poured her pain onto the canvas. She didn't paint to make people smile. She painted to make them feel. She once said, "My painting carries with it the message of pain." But inside that pain, there was beauty. There was truth. There was Frida. And the world was about to notice her. Narrators pause. My friends, I want to stop here for just a moment. I want to ask you something important, something to think about deeply. Frida's life was destroyed in 1 second. She lost her health, her dream of being a doctor, and her freedom of movement. But in that dark, lonely room, she chose to pick up a paintbrush. She turned her worst tragedy into her greatest power. I want to ask you, have you ever faced a moment in your life where everything went wrong? A moment where you felt broken? And if you have, how did you find the strength to stand up again? Did you find a new path, like Frida found painting? Please, tell me your story in the comments below. I really want to read how you found light in the darkness. It is these stories of survival that connect us all. Part 2. The Fire Called Diego. Frida Kahlo had survived death. She had survived unimaginable pain, and now she was discovering her new life as an artist. She started painting more and more self-portraits. She used bold, bright colors. She painted dreams, nightmares, and raw emotions. She wasn't painting flowers in a vase or pretty views of the mountains. She was painting her heart, and her heart was full of scars. She once said, "I never paint dreams or nightmares, I paint my own reality." And in that reality, there was one name that kept coming back: Diego Rivera. In 1927, Frida finally got out of bed. She was still weak. She walked with a limp because of her injured leg. Her body still ached with every step, but her eyes were full of fire. She took her paintings under her arm and went straight to find Diego Rivera, the famous artist she had seen years ago at her school. He was working on a giant mural at the Ministry of Education. He was high up on a scaffold. Frida called up to him. She shouted, "I have not come to flirt. I have come to show you my paintings. I want to know if they're worth anything." Diego looked down. He was surprised by this small, fierce woman. He climbed down and looked at her paintings. He saw something that no one else saw. He looked at her and said, "She is an authentic artist." From that moment, something began between them. It was not just about art. It was not just interest. It was something wild. It was a connection of souls. In 1929, Frida Kahlo married Diego Rivera. She was 22 years old. He was 42. He was big, loud, and famous. He had already been married twice before. He had children, he had many lovers, and he had a terrible reputation with women. People warned Frida. Her parents warned her. They said, "Don't marry him. He will destroy you." But Frida didn't listen. She loved him. She later said, "I have suffered 2 great accidents in my life. One was the bus, and the other was Diego." That quote would become legendary. It meant that loving him was as painful and as impactful as the crash that broke her bones. Their love was full of passion, art, politics, and pain. Frida once said, "Diego was everything. My child, my lover, my universe, my pain." They traveled to America together. They went to San Francisco, to Detroit, and to New York City. Diego was treated like a king. He was painting giant murals everywhere. He was respected, powerful, and praised by everyone. But Frida? She was seen as just his wife. She was different. She was small. She dressed in traditional Mexican clothes, long, colorful skirts and ribbons in her hair. She was bold, outspoken, and totally unique. People in America looked at her with surprise. They were used to women dressing in gray and brown, blending in. But they couldn't ignore Frida. She wore colorful dresses, flower crowns, and big jewelry. She walked with a strength they couldn't explain. In every city they visited, she painted. She painted her face. She painted her thoughts. She painted her losses. While living in the industrial city of Detroit, Frida became pregnant. She was filled with hope. She wanted to be a mother more than anything in the world. But her body, broken by the bus accident years ago, was not ready. She had a miscarriage. She lost the baby. The pain shattered her again. It was a different kind of pain, not physical, but a deep hole in her soul. She painted her grief. One of her most emotional works from this time is called Henry Ford Hospital. It shows her lying in a large hospital bed, bleeding, crying, and surrounded by floating images of a baby, her body, and her sadness. It was raw. It was brutal. It was honest. As if losing her child wasn't enough, Frida's heart was broken again by the man she loved. Diego cheated on her. He had many affairs, but this time was different. He cheated on her with her own sister, Christina. This betrayal cut deeper than anything else. It was a double knife in her heart. Frida was destroyed. In her anger and sadness, she cut off her long, beautiful black hair. She stopped wearing the colorful Mexican dresses Diego loved. She wore men's suits in her self-portraits. She drank to numb the pain. She cried. She screamed. But she didn't stop painting. She painted her anger. She painted her broken heart. She painted her disappointment. One of her most famous paintings from this time is called A Few Small Nips. It shows a woman lying in blood, stabbed by her lover. It wasn't just art. It was her truth. In 1939, Frida and Diego got divorced. Everyone thought, now she will disappear. Now she will fade away. But no, this was when Frida truly rose. She began wearing her pain like a royal crown. She said, I am my own muse. I am the subject I know best. I am the subject I want to better. She had affairs with men and with women. She laughed, she painted, she smoked, she drank, and she danced. She was alive in her own way. That same year, she painted one of her greatest works, The Two Fridas. It shows two versions of herself sitting side by side. One has a bleeding heart. The other is holding her pain with pride. It was Frida, divided between love and loss. Strangely, Diego couldn't live without her either. In 1940, just a year after their divorce, they got married again. But this time, Frida was different. She no longer needed him to survive. She had found herself, and the world was beginning to see her too. Frida started having art exhibitions in New York, Paris, and Mexico. She met the great painter Picasso. He admired her work. She met André Breton, a famous surrealist, who said Frida's art is like a ribbon around a bomb. Beautiful, but explosive. The world finally saw what she had been painting all along. Not just pretty pictures, but pain, power, and truth. Even while the world clapped for her, Frida's body was getting worse. Her spine was collapsing. Her right leg had gangrene, a serious infection. She had to undergo more than 30 surgeries in her life. She wore metal corsets just to stay upright. She lived with pain every single day, but she painted through it. She smiled through it. She said, I am not sick. I am broken, but I am happy as long as I can paint. Frida Kahlo wasn't just surviving. She was burning bright and wild. People didn't understand her completely, but they couldn't look away. Her spine was weakening. Her legs hurt constantly. She had to wear tight, hard corsets made of leather and steel. Sometimes she couldn't get out of bed for weeks. Sometimes she had to paint while lying flat, just like she did after her bus accident when she was a teenager. She was now in her 30s. She was young by the world's eyes, but she was old with pain. She once said, "Pain, pleasure, and death are no more than a process for existence." To most people, that sounded like deep poetry, but for Frida, it was her daily truth. She would laugh loudly at a party and then cry silently when no one was watching. But through it all, she kept painting. She said, "Painting completed my life." As the world noticed her art, Mexico began to see her differently too. She was no longer just Diego's wife. She was becoming a national icon. Why? Because she was everything Mexico wanted to celebrate. She was a strong woman, proud of her roots. She dressed in traditional Tehuana clothing. She was unafraid of politics. She was unapologetic in her truth. She painted with Mexican colors, bold reds, greens, yellows. She used symbols like monkeys, skeletons, hearts, thorns, and Aztec arms. She was like a living painting, loud, fearless, indigenous, and proud. While many Mexican artists at the time wanted to become more European, Frida wanted to become more Mexican. She said, "I am more Mexican than the mole sauce in my veins." And that pride made people fall in love with her. By the mid-1940s, Frida had a secret. She had begun taking strong pain medicines, morphine, codeine, just to sleep, just to move. She smiled in public, but at night she was often screaming in pain, unable to walk, sometimes unable to sit. Her hands trembled, but she kept painting. She even painted her medical corsets, turning her torture devices into art. Each brushstroke said, "I am still here." In 1943, she was invited to teach at La Esmeralda, a prestigious art school in Mexico City. Her students were young, passionate, and they loved her deeply. They called themselves Los Fridos, the Fridas. They followed her everywhere. They listened to her every word. They copied her art. But sometimes Frida was too sick to make it to class. So her students came to her house, La Casa Azul, the Blue House. They sat on the floor around her bed. She taught them from under her covers. She spoke of color, of pain, and of truth. She didn't teach them strict rules. She taught them soul. "Don't paint the surface," she told them. "Paint what hurts." Though she was married again to Diego, their relationship was still full of fire. They loved each other, but they also hurt each other. Both had affairs. Both were jealous. Both were tied together by a bond no one else understood. Diego once said, "I loved Frida like a volcano loves the sky, with fire, with ash, with smoke." They fought. They made up. They hurt each other. And they stayed together because somehow they were each other's home. But even love could not protect Frida from what was coming. In 1953, Frida's right leg became badly infected. The doctors told her the infection was spreading fast. They said if they didn't act, it would kill her. So they did the unthinkable. They cut off her leg. Frida, the girl who once climbed trees, who ran like a wild cat, who danced at parties despite her limp, now had only one leg. She was 46 years old. It broke her, not just physically, but emotionally. She wore a wooden leg with a red boot on it, stylish, strong, bold. But inside, she was devastated. She wrote in her diary, "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" Her words were beautiful, but they hid the darkness inside. Even with one leg, even with her spine collapsing, even while taking morphine every day, Frida refused to stop. She painted even more. She wore flowers in her hair. She hosted friends. She wrote poetry. And in that same year, 1953, something unbelievable happened. She had her first solo exhibition in Mexico. Yes, after nearly 30 years of pain and painting, Frida was finally given her first solo art show in her own country. But her body was too weak to walk. The doctors told her, "You must stay in bed. You cannot attend the show." Frida laughed. She said, "They want to stop me from living? Let them try." She wore her most colorful dress. She put fresh flowers in her hair. She put on her bright red lipstick. And she arrived at the gallery in an ambulance. They carried her in on her hospital bed. They placed her bed right in the center of the room. She lay there like a queen, surrounded by her paintings. The guests were shocked. Then they clapped, and many cried. Because they weren't just seeing art, they were seeing courage. They were seeing a woman who had every reason to stay hidden in the dark, choosing instead to celebrate life in the light. Frida lifted her glass and toasted the crowd. "I am not sick. I am broken, but I am happy to be alive as long as I can paint." The world saw her pain and called it art. But more than that, they saw her spirit, unstoppable, unshakable. Frida Kahlo. After the 1953 exhibition where Frida arrived on a hospital bed and shocked the world, something strange began to happen. People looked at her differently. They no longer just saw the paintings on the wall. They saw her. They saw a woman who had lost her child, her leg, and her health, but still showed up with red lipstick, flowers in her hair, and a smile full of defiance. They saw a woman who refused to be silent, a woman who chose art over shame, color over pain, and power over pity. And for the first time, Frida Kahlo was not just an artist. She was becoming a symbol. In 1954, something was burning inside Frida. Not just pain, but rage. She saw injustice in the world. She saw women being controlled. She saw poor people being ignored. She saw power in the hands of cruel men. Frida never stayed quiet. She joined protests. She wrote angry letters. She painted with louder, angrier colors. She spoke against war. She spoke against imperialism. She supported the poor, the disabled, and the broken. Even in her fragile, dying body, Frida became a storm. "They tried to silence me," she wrote, "but I painted louder." She waved red flags. She marched in her wheelchair. She lifted her voice even when her hands were shaking. People began calling her not just an artist, but a revolutionary soul. At home, Frida was still with Diego. Their love had become complicated. They didn't live like a normal married couple. They lived in two separate houses connected by a small bridge. They both had other lovers. They both argued, yelled, and sometimes didn't speak for days. But deep inside, Frida still loved him. It was like a wound that never closed. She once wrote in her diary, "Diego, nothing compares to your hands. Nothing like the green gold of your eyes. My body aches for you." She even said, "I cannot love without pain." And Diego, he loved her too, but he didn't know how to stop hurting her. It was a love story, not of perfection, but of chaos, scars, and truth. In her final years, Frida began writing a diary. The pages were full of poems, drawings, secrets, and fear. She wrote with red ink, black ink, and colors that looked like blood. Sometimes her words were clear. Sometimes they looked like she was crying while writing. She wrote things like, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. They amputated my leg. They gave me fake hope. I bleed inside. I paint flowers so they don't die." She drew hearts with cracks in them. She drew doves without wings. She drew self-portraits with thorns wrapped around her neck. Her diary wasn't just a notebook. It was her soul falling onto paper. Frida was now in constant pain. She couldn't sit for long. She couldn't sleep. She cried while laughing. She whispered to her nurses, "Just help me paint, and I'll be okay." Every time the world thought she would finally stop, she painted again. Even if she had to be held up by pillows, even if she had to use her left hand when her right one shook, she painted until the pain became too strong to hold a brush. In her last year, Frida painted one of her most famous works. It is called Viva la Vida, Long Live Life. It is a painting of bright red watermelons. Written on one of them, in bold letters, are the words, Viva la Vida. She painted it while in bed, surrounded by pain, tears, and silence. It was her last scream, a scream that said, "Even now, at the end, I choose life, I choose color, I choose to leave something beautiful behind." That painting is now in museums across the world. People stand in front of it and cry without words. Because it was not just art, it was Frida's goodbye. In July 1954, just 11 days before her death, Frida did something no one expected. Even though she was weak, in agony, and could barely move, she joined one last protest against the U.S. government for invading Guatemala. She told her nurse, "I must go, even if I die." She was wheeled into the crowd, waving a red flag, surrounded by people chanting for justice. People stared. Some cried because they saw a woman who had lost everything, still showing up to fight for others. It was her final public appearance. The world didn't know, but Frida Kahlo had just said her last goodbye to the streets she loved. Back home in La Casa Azul, the Blue House, Frida stopped talking much. She looked at the sky for hours. She wrote poetry. She stared at her old paintings. She listened to Diego walking in the next room. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just waited. In her final diary entry, she wrote those famous words, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." She smiled at her nurses. She held Diego's hand one last time. And on July 13, 1954, Frida Kahlo closed her eyes. But this is not where her story ends, because legends don't end when they die. They begin, the woman who became immortal. Frida Kahlo died on July 13, 1954, at the age of 47. Her body was taken from La Casa Azul, her bright blue home in Coyoacán, to a quiet funeral. Few people came. There was no massive crowd. There was no international news coverage. There were no awards. There were no red carpets. There were no headlines shouting her name. The woman who had lived her truth in paint and arrived at her last exhibition in a hospital bed was buried with silence. Her body was cremated. Her ashes were placed in a pre-Columbian urn shaped like a toad, because Diego had once affectionately called her his little toad. She was gone. But something was still burning in the air, something the world had not yet seen, something that refused to stay silent. For many years after her death, Frida's name was nearly forgotten. Museums were quiet about her. Art critics focused on men. Even Diego, her famous husband, continued to be celebrated while Frida remained in the background, a shadow. People didn't understand her art. They said it was too personal. They said it was too painful. They said it was too emotional. But what they didn't know was that those emotions would one day wake up the world. Narrator's pause. Before we see how she conquered the world after death, I want to invite you to do something. Frida's story is one of a kind, but there are many other incredible lives we can learn from. If you are enjoying this story, And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next dramatic part of our biography series, please subscribe to the channel right now. By subscribing, you are joining a community of learners who believe in the power of stories. We have many more tales of resilience coming soon that will help you master English through emotion. So, click that button, and let's continue. In the 1970s, something began to change. A new generation of people, especially young women, artists, poets, and activists, discovered her paintings. They discovered her diary. They discovered her story. They didn't just see art. They saw themselves. Frida had become a mirror. She was a mirror for women who felt unheard. She was a mirror for people living with pain. She was a mirror for outsiders, rebels, and dreamers. For those who were told, "You are too much," or "You are not enough," Frida became their voice. And the world finally started asking, who was this woman with the thick eyebrows, the flower crown, and the burning eyes? By the 1980s and 1990s, Frida Kahlo exploded into global fame. Her face appeared on magazine covers. Her paintings were shown in major museums around the world. Her diary was published and translated into dozens of languages. She became a fashion icon, a symbol of strength, and an artistic legend. Suddenly, people from Tokyo to London, from Paris to New York, from Buenos Aires to Berlin were talking about Frida Kahlo. Her words were printed on walls. Her quotes were painted on buses. Her life was taught in schools. And the world didn't just want her story. They wanted her art. Frida's paintings, which once sat quietly in her home, began to sell for millions of dollars. Here are just a few examples to show you her impact. Diego and I, a haunting portrait of herself with Diego's face painted on her forehead, sold for $34.9 million in 2021 at a Sotheby's auction. This became the most expensive artwork ever sold by a Latin American artist. Two nudes in a forest sold for $8 million. Roots, another deeply personal work, sold for $5.6 million. From being ignored to becoming one of the most valuable female painters in history. The same paintings she made in bed while bleeding, while crying, while shaking in pain, are now worth more than diamonds. But their true value is not money. Their value is in what they gave to the world. Today, Frida's face is everywhere. You see her on t-shirts, notebooks, jewelry, murals, and tattoos. Her face is on postage stamps in Mexico. She has been featured as a Barbie doll, in Netflix documentaries, and in Oscar-nominated films. The actress Salma Hayek even played her in the film Frida in 2002, a movie that was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. Frida, who once said, "I never paint dreams, I paint my own reality," became the dream of millions. Frida's house, La Casa Azul, is now a museum. It receives over 1.2 million visitors every year. People travel from every part of the world just to see her bedroom. They go there to touch her brushes with their eyes. They walk in her garden. They feel her energy in the walls. They cry in front of her empty wheelchair. It is not just a museum. It is a temple of courage. Frida is remembered not because she smiled through the pain, but because she showed the pain and still chose to live. She showed her scars. She embraced her broken body. She said things other people were afraid to say. She didn't care about being polite. She cared about being real. She once said, "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." And that is why her story will never die. Because in every girl who has been broken, in every person living with chronic pain, in every soul that has been betrayed, lost, or told to stay silent, Frida whispers, "You are not alone, and you are still beautiful." Frida's story is not just about painting. It is about fighting. It is about fighting for love. It is about fighting for art. It is about fighting for your voice, even when the world tries to shut it down. She was born into a world that wanted women to be quiet. She screamed with color. She lived with a broken spine, but she stood taller than kings. She died young, but she became eternal. Frida once said, "At the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can." And maybe that is the truth we all need to hear. Your pain does not make you weak. It makes you powerful. So now you know the truth. Frida Kahlo didn't have a perfect life. She didn't have perfect health. She didn't have perfect love. But still, she lived with fire. She painted her pain. And she turned her broken pieces into something the world would never forget. That is the lesson you must carry with you today. Your pain is not the end. Your pain can become your story. Your story can become your power. And your power can touch millions. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have everything figured out. Just start with what you have. Even if it is pain, even if it is tears, even if all you have left is one small hope inside you. Protect it. Fight for it. Because you don't know who you can become until you refuse to quit. Frida didn't quit, and neither will you. So whatever you are going through right now, remember this: your scars are proof that you survived, and your voice deserves to be heard. Final outro. And that is where our story concludes for today. This one was a real journey, wasn't it? I am so curious to hear your take on all of this. What were your final thoughts? Do you have any lingering questions about why a character did what they did, or about Frida's art? Please, leave all your opinions, theories, and questions in the comments below. I truly love reading them and building this conversation with all of you. Thank you for listening and for learning with me. I will see you in the next video. With love, from your friend, John.